let me preface by saying that I met Yehoshua, I don't know how long ago it was now, maybe 5 years ago, when I invited him to come to the sukkah at the College of Staten Island where I was the Hillel director at the time. And he gave a program at the sukkah. And quite honestly, Yehoshua, I was like, I don't know if college kids will come, if this will appeal to them. However, we had a really, the sukkah was full to the brim, and the students listened with rapt attention and answered lots of questions. And we really had a beautiful night of Hol HaMoed Sukkot in our sukkah on Staten Island. So ever since that time, I've kind of followed Yehoshua, and he's a really cool guy, people. Um, and I'm going to read his bio, which, sorry to be reading, but it's rare to find an Orthodox Jewish author who masterfully infuses their work with teachings of Jewish tradition. The poet Yehoshua November does this so beautifully and radically in each of his works, and that is true, as I think you're going to find tonight. After receiving his BA from Binghamton University and his MFA from the University of Pittsburgh, no, November attended Chabad Yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey, and for 2 years he ceased to write. Eventually decided to return to poetry, and he is the author of the poetry collections God's Optimism, which was published in 2010 and was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, and Two Worlds Exist, which was in 2016, a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award and Patterson Poetry Prize. And Yehoshua's poems have appeared in the Cider Press Review, the Sun Magazine, the New York Times Magazine, and many other publications. He's taught at Touro College and at Rutgers. And as I said, he's coming to us from Teaneck. So without hearing from me anymore, Yehoshua, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thanks so much for having me. It's really a great honor. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I'll just read some poems. The famous Russian poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko said that a poet's true autobiography is his poetry. So I'll read my poetry and then whatever questions you want to ask. Um, so I'll kind of skip around a little bit between the different books, but I'll start with a poem from my new book. It's called The Concealment of Endless Light, and the poem is called Teachers and Students. And increasingly, I've been writing poems that are kind of written in different sections. Like if you can even see, there's I don't know how well you can see, but there's different numbered sections, and they're kind of like different vignettes that fit under the same umbrella, but each is its own kind of small moment, and the different vignettes kind of fit together and almost serve as a kind of commentary on one another and deepen one another, hopefully. So this one is called Teachers and Students, and it's different sections, and I'll read the various numbered sections. So Teachers and Students. 1. It was when she pulled out her chair after entering midway through our fourth class, muttering what at first sounded like a lie about struggling to find parking, that I realized my Vietnamese student had only one hand. She wrote a short piece on her high school music teacher's prediction her prosthetic could not summon the pressure she'd need to squeeze out the staccato notes at the upcoming violin recital. 2. Strangely, often, teachers' most hurtful comments are also untrue. 3. At the dining room table, I lost my temper after one of my sons misread a word in a Hebrew prayer we'd practiced 100 times. I'm a stupid person. What do you want from me? 4. When you pray, do not make your prayers routine, but an entreaty of mercy and a supplication before the Almighty, Rabbi Shimon would say. 5. All semester, the sorority sister tossed her dark hair, checked her phone, whispered to her friends in light tones. In her final portfolio, a poem about her attempt in ninth grade to OD on aspirin after learning the upperclassman she'd given herself to had been playing first senior to sleep with a freshman. 6. In one of my earliest memories, I am a boy whose father has brought him to the town rabbi for thinking lowly of himself after earning a B- on an exam in the book of Genesis. In his basement office, the large rabbi leans toward me. Don't compare yourself to your classmates. 7. A professor takes a sip of coffee from his earthenware mug, writes fascinating in the margins of a student paper without reading a word. 8. In his notebook, on the page where he wrote about finding his father's ugly blue body, my student's script turns very large, but barely legible. 9. It's said that at age 6, a slow learner with prodigious stepbrothers and a famous rabbinic father, Maimonides ran away from home, opened the ark of the local synagogue, pleaded, saw sparks, and awoke with a photographic memory. 10. On my commute to teach courses in Brooklyn and New Brunswick, I listened to the recorded lectures of a rabbi who recently passed away. Between teaching the technical verses on the tabernacle's construction, he offers impersonations of the yeshiva cook, Montreal circa 1960, and tells stories of his father's rabbinate in Newark. In one, a drunken former SS officer follows the spiritual leader down Union Street, begging for divine exoneration. I will not forgive you, the rabbi answers each time. 11. Once I returned a failing paper to a front tackle who stood up to his full 6'7" height, rustled the pages, and bolted out of the room in his scarlet sweatsuit. A moment later, he returned to grab his backpack, flip the light switch, and disappear again. Winter's muted daylight entered through the windows along the back wall of the remedial classroom. In the semi-darkness, 17 faces gazed up at me. Okay, I'll read a poem. This is from my first book. It's called God's Optimism. And this poem is called Balchuvas at the Mikveh. And it's based on the idea, the practice, especially in Hasidic communities, that to immerse in a mikveh before morning prayer as a kind of preparation. But in this case, it's in a yeshiva, and some of the students are Baalei Tshuva, which means they are kind of returnees to traditional life. They either didn't grow up within a religious framework, or they did and then they left and came back. So in this yeshiva, you have some people who were what are called the frum from birth. They were always religious, and then other people who are kind of returnees, and they're together in the mikvah. It's kind of like a men's locker room. Except I always say that the only difference between this and the men's locker room is that nobody's in good shape because it's a yeshiva. So everyone's just learning Talmud all day. No one's exercising. Okay. Anyway, Baal Tshuva is at the mikveh, and of course, there's the idea that in Judaism, people are supposed to avoid getting tattoos. Baal Tshuva is at the mikveh. Sometimes you see them in the dressing area of the ritual bath. Young bearded men unbuttoning their white shirts, slipping out of their black trousers, until, standing entirely naked, they are betrayed by the tattoos of their past life. A ring of fire climbing up a leg, an eagle whose feathery wingspan spreads the width of the chest, or worse, the scripted name of a woman other than one's wife. Then, holding only a towel, they begin once more the walk past the others in the dressing room. The rabbi they will soon sit before in Talmud class. Men with the last names of the first Hasidic families. Almost everyone devout since birth. And with each step, they curse the poverty that keeps the dark ink etched in their skin. until finally they descend the stairs of the purifying water, and beneath the translucent liquid appear once again like the next man, who, in all his days, has probably never made a sacrifice as endearing to God. Okay, I'll read another mikveh poem. Seems like a good idea. This one, is anybody a Roy Orbison fan? Is anybody here like Roy Orbison? Yeah, Roy Orbison is good. So this is a poem called "Hearing Roy Orbison in a Mikveh in Salem, Massachusetts." There's many poems that have this title. This is just my own rendition of this with this title. But you'll find many of these poems out there. Okay. So it's called Hearing Roy Orbison in a Mikveh in Salem, Massachusetts, and it borrows lyrics from Orbison's song and also some ideas from mystical ideas. So it kind of goes back and forth between them. It's kind of interwoven. Hearing Roy Orbison in a Mikveh in Salem, Massachusetts. In dreams, I walk with you, Roy Orbison crooned from the speakers above the indoor pool at the Holiday Inn, steam rising as I resurfaced from beneath the chlorine waters of the makeshift mikveh. If slightly rearranged, the letters in the word Tevila, ritual immersion in a body of water, spell habital, the self's dissolution in the face of the divine. He was quiet, self-effacing, Orbison's biographers noted. Bathed in spotlight, he hid behind Wayfarer's sunglasses and never danced on stage. To submerge beneath the water, the mystics add, is to return to the divine womb, the way the soul returns to the heavens each night as the body dozes. Claudette, Orbison's first wife, whom he divorced after her infidelities with the contractor who'd built the couple's Hendersonville home, and whom he remarried a year later, died in the singer's arms shortly after her motorcycle collided with a truck pulling on to South Water Avenue. It was 6 a.m. I had the mikveh to myself. I heard desperation and the operatic voice that hailed from Vernon, Texas. I was in Salem for a panel on 21st century devotional poetry. Like the soul climbing while the body reposes, Orbison's voice rose higher than the other sopranos. In dreams, I talk with you. The lyrics came to me as I slept, Orbison claimed, words I wrote down upon waking. Our panel asked what it meant for a contemporary poet to speak to our Father in heaven in this millennium. Mostly, we do not know. Two of Orbison's sons, 6 and 11, died when the Hendersonville home went up in flames. Orbison's second wife, Barbara, passed away on the 23rd anniversary of the singer's death. Once, 3,000 years ago, Moses asked God, who could have made the world any way he wanted, why he'd created suffering. Moses, whose name means one drawn from the water, was the only prophet to speak with God face to face, that is, in a waking state. But he heard only staticky silence, oceanic, wave-like, the crackling of a turntable following a song's final note. Thanks. I'll read a couple more. This one is called Notes on the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is, of course, a Kabbalistic concept developed especially by the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, where he describes how pre-creation, the Or Ein Sof, divine light, filled all of the quote-unquote space, the figurative space before creation, and God wanted to create a finite world with finite beings, and he therefore had to carve out a space in the infinite light so that the finite reality, the world could take shape and not be overwhelmed by the light. That's called the chalol, or the makam panoi, this empty space. And the light was pushed to the side, figuratively, and then God drew one ray of the light, of the original light, before the tzimtzum, before the contraction, and from that ray of light called the kav, that went into this empty space, and that was the divine energy that God, the finite divine, contracted divine energy God used to create the world. So an interesting concept that comes about from that whole idea is that, and especially according to Hasidic thought, is that God's power to conceal himself is actually surpasses even his power of infinity, because in order to hide an infinite light, you need something even greater than infinity, a power even greater than infinity. So God's power to hide his infinite light is even greater than his infinite light itself. So this is called Notes on the Tzimtzum, and it's again divided into different sections. One, once on a bus from Jerusalem to Ein Gedi, I saw a man place his hand over his bare head and recite the blessing over water. Two, one can't use his hand as a head covering, the rabbis conclude, because one can't cover oneself with oneself. Three, since the divine hand hides that everything stems out of the divine, when God looks at the world like moss growing over moss, he sees only divinity. Four, the Jew without a yarmulke placed the cap on his water bottle and resumed watching a YouTube on black holes. Five, in this world, Hashem conceals his omnipresence, his infinite light, his power to hide, eclipsing his power to reveal. Six, in this world, we ride buses through a divine concealment whose diameter is greater than infinity. We sip water beside a dam that holds back endless light. Okay, a couple more, three more. This one is about the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. And I used to live in Pittsburgh, so it deals with that a little bit. And it's also, again, in different sections. This is about the Tree of Life shooting. One. So the title is There is Only One Story. One. There are always two stories, that of the body, that of the soul, plus the story of cousin Riva, who, arriving late that morning, was instructed by an officer to wait things out at the nearby public library. I feel guilty about not dying with my friends, she said the next day. 2. It is October 27th, 1988. My friend Robert plays wiffle ball in his backyard, a budding Tree of Life synagogue. It is October 27th, 2018. A stranger passes through unlocked double doors. Blocks away, Robert's son begins his bar mitzvah portion. Abraham inviting angels, wayfarers, into his open tent. Perhaps, Robert postulates, the soul of my recently deceased father interceded on high, causing the news to be hidden until his grandson had closed the Torah scroll. And in the afternoon, the scroll is reopened, and we read, and Abraham came to eulogize over Sarah and to cry for her. And according to the hidden story, the one the mystics tell, Abraham represents the body, and Abraham represents the soul, and Sarah the body. 3. Now it is night, half a block from the apartment where, 17 years earlier, my wife and I lived when first wed. Jews of Pittsburgh stand in the rain holding candles. 11 souls ascend to the region of mystery. then swoop down to hover incandescently over their former lives. Away from the cameras and fanfare, 11 bodies are ushered through burial rituals. Pottery shards placed over 22 eyes, 11 mouths. Water poured to purify physical forms that had until recently housed souls whose last act on earth was to whisper a prayer. There is only one story, say the mystics. The souls of the Jewish people throughout Jewish history form one larger body. The body bears more wounds than we want to recall. No one can explain how it limps forward, but has not faltered. Okay, I'll read two more. Um, this one is called Conjoined Twins. My father was a resident in the hospital when my young mother gave birth to them, two bodies and one heart. And hearing that the pathologists at that teaching institution were coming to learn the lessons science's rare cases could teach, my father turned the combination on his locker and concealed the stillborn baby boys in a box. Early the next morning, another Jewish resident stood over the bodies with my father, performed the ritual circumcisions in the silence of an unoccupied delivery room. Choose names you would not otherwise use, the rabbi had instructed over the phone. At the burial, my father asked why this had happened. Perhaps you are not as religious as you should be, the rabbi answered. And the answer plunged God into concealment for my father. I looked quickly and saw them embracing. My mother later said of the two boys who were to be born between Purim and Passover. One was named Mordechai, who gathered all the Jews when they thought they had been forsaken. And one was named Pesach, the holiday when all Jews, even idol worshippers, were freed as long as they desired to go. And they left their bondage and arrived at the mountain, where, the Midrash states, they camped in the desert like one man with one heart. Okay, one more poem. This is the last poem in my new book. It's also kind of like sections, and this will be the last one. And then whatever questions you want to ask, I'm happy to answer. Um, so this is called Notes on Marriage. Notes on Marriage. The first week of the pandemic, I delivered 2 bags of flour, one whole wheat, one white, to our elderly neighbors. It was dusk, their home brightly lit. Through the window, I glimpsed the gray-haired man lifting his wife into a dance. When wife and husband embrace and kiss, their forearms spell the feminine divine name composed of 4 letters. Their 4 lips spell the masculine divine name composed of 4 letters. In the Galician village of Sokolova, my wife's great-grandfather was known as the Reuter Shochet, the red-headed butcher. His given name Baruch, his wife's Bracha, male and female for blessing and blessing. My wife placed a cup of steaming coffee beside a plate of buttered toast and scrambled eggs. A blessing. In my lunchbox, the sandwich, hummus, lettuce, cheese she prepared for my dinner. I can't go back in time to warn a dreamy-eyed teenager not to fall for the saxophonist's after-party promise. I can't chance upon myself on the stairwell at Taylor Alderdice High School and explain patience. Because God split the first couple into male and female selves, All our lives we ache for wholeness. An accordion wall divided my wife's childhood bedroom from the rest of her apartment. A year of college overseas, her first taste of freedom. Mornings, young men waited at her door with danishes and chocolate milk in their outstretched hands. Before creation, God divided the feminine divine light from the masculine divine light, Shechina from Kutchabrichu. In the Messianic era, the two will reunite. A compliment from a colleague, a shared glance, two subway stops from home. Because the first couple ate the fruit of confusion, we desire those who are not our other half. May Hashem guard your goings and comings, arrivals and departures, your Netflix account, your dining room table, and your marital bed. After the prelude, the embrace and the kiss, the commingling of the masculine and feminine names, husband and wife reunite as one flesh, skin to skin beneath the covering, revealed and concealed as the divine moves beneath the veneer of the physical world. Masking tape around the handles of our kitchen faucet, a sister-in-law's hand-me-down dresses. Why do you ask for so little? Why did I marry a woman with a childlike streak? And how, possessing that streak, did you make it through the day we learned our daughter had lost her hearing? The years I barely looked up from student papers. Once I saw a man in a navy suit and dark fedora kneeling in the mud at the edge of his wife's open grave. He pled for forgiveness while strangers born across the ocean lowered her body into the earth. If Sarah represents the body and Abraham the soul, why did God tell Abraham to listen to Sarah's voice? Because, the mystics answer, in the Messianic era, we will see that the source of the body is loftier than the source of the soul, and so a soul descends into a body. One August night, both 20, we sat on your childhood bed, backs against your pink bedroom wall, the accordion divider half open, and spoke of going our separate ways. We will have a good life together, you said, raising your voice over the AC's steady rumble. You will see. Okay, thanks so much. All right. Does anybody want to ask a question?
Okay, so I'll start. First of
Yeah.
all, thank you for sharing those poems. Um, I took notes
Mhm.
so that I could remember what you said from the beginning to the end. And I noticed that there's a theme in your poetry that is always, it seems to always go back to relationship between uh, the twins, the mother and the father, the husband and the wife, the person and God, the Baalei Tshuvot, and the forever from, I don't know what you want to call them. So lots of poets write about nature. They write about, man's relationship with nature. You seem to write about man's relationship with others. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess that's because I live in Teaneck. It's more of an urban area. Well,
Trees and Tina.
no, there are some deer. I saw some deer, going around today. That's a really interesting question. I never really thought about that. Um, I think there are some contemporary nature poets um, But probably most contemporary poets are today because most poets are not living in nature. That's not really the subject. I mean, the Romantics, the poets writing in the 1800s, late 1700s, 1800s, were writing a lot about nature because they were trying to kind of escape the industrial centers, and that was like a kind of became the topic of poetry. But today, I think we're pretty much very immersed in urban life, in contemporary life, technological life, um, and nature is less a subject that you'll find, I think, in contemporary poetry, at least relative to like the 1800s. Um, I guess, I think that I write, uh, I would say that as a poet, I don't really feel that I choose my topics. I feel that my topics choose me. Um, I can't just sit down and write about on demand about something, a topic if somebody asks me to write about it. Usually, the way that my poems come about is that there's some kind of experience that is poignant or moving, often overwhelming and painful, and then the poems stem out of those experiences. So usually that has to do with relationships, I think, and how people hurt each other, how we hurt people that we love, and how we try to heal from that. And I guess those are the most um, poignant experiences. Nature is more, I think, a transcendent kind of reflective experience, whereas for me, I think I'm running about out of what's most emotionally pressing. There's a verse that describes the command to make the olive oil for the menorah. It says, talking, God is speaking to Moses, and he says, "Ata tetzaves b'nei Israel, you command the Jewish people, v'yikol elecha, take to you shemen zay zach, pure olive oil, kasis lamor, crushed for the ma'or. The ma'or actually means source of light. Lahalos ner tamid, to light the eternal lamp." And so a Hasidic reading of that verse is crushed kasis, crushed lama'or, for the source of light. When a person is crushed, the source of light or the essence of the soul comes out. So when somebody, I think we're seeing it now, being persecuted as for supporting Israel. Jews are victims of anti-Semitism because of that, and then maybe the Jewish spark comes out, and the person feels I'm a Jew, and that's who I am, quintessentially. So the point I want to make, though, just to sum up, is that in this idea, when you're crushed, like when the olive is crushed, the oil comes out. When the person is crushed, their essence, their soul kind of expresses itself. So I think that relationships is really the area where, I feel squeezed sometimes. My own mistakes that I make in my relationship with other people, ways that I hurt people, ways that people hurt me, and that's, I guess, for me, that's the stuff of poetry.
I was going to make the same observation as Amy, that the theme of your poems is about life and relationships, human to human, human to the Almighty, etc. Jewish history is so rich of these relationships, not just in contemporary times, but going back a century back or even more. Have you thought about writing poems of the world that we no longer have
Hmm.
across the big pond, so to speak?
Do you mean about like shtetl life or
Not
like?
life, no, in a small shtetl, in the
Hmm.
bigger cities, in the large cities where the Jews were a major proportion of the population.
Hmm.
So,
Uh, yeah. I have written some poems that deal more with the past. Uh, I guess again, I think that I'm more of like an autobiographical poet, and I'm writing a lot about my own life. That's kind of what I'm drawn to writing. Maybe it's cathartic for me, but it's also what I feel, the way that I can write the most powerful poems. So That's just what I'm drawn to. But I do have some poems that are about the Holocaust and connecting the Holocaust to the period of the Roman exile, and so on. Um, so yeah, I have some poems like that, but I would say most of my poems are probably more contemporary.
Okay.
Yeah. Other questions?
I think my favorite image in the poems that you read was the relationship between, well, the image of the uh, Orthodox Jew turned scientist covering his head on the bus to Ein Gedi
Yeah.
with his hand because
Yeah.
he doesn't have his kippah, but he wants to say shahakol on the water, um, which you likened to God's mystical ability to both conceal and reveal and to do tzimtzum. And I could just, I was just there with you on that bus to Ein Gedi, uh, as you experienced this moment and experienced it uh, as an insight into the divine. And since you opened up this insight that a lot of your poems are autobiographical, I wanted to ask you to share more about that moment.
Oh, that okay, that's very interesting. So that poem was it's inspired in part by a teaching, a Hasidic discourse, mimer by the fifth Chabad Rebbe. His name was the Rebbe Rashab, Rebbe Shalom Dovber, and the mimer is called Viadaita, Viadaita Moskva, and it's about divine unity and how we know that there's two general foremost divine names like the Yud Kei Vav Kei, Baruch Atah Hashem, Havaya, and Elokim. Those are two foremost divine names. Um, and we also say often that Havaya is Elokim, that they're the same. Havaya hu Elokim, like at the end of Yom Kippur, in the Ela we say it. Hashem Elokeinu, Havaya Elokeinu is Echad, it's one. So that mimer, that discourse speaks about how there is a way that God presents as infinite and transcendent and beyond, and that's Havaya. The word the Yud and Hey and Vav actually have in it Hayahova V'yiyah, is, was, and will be Babas Achas in one phrase. So that reflects God's infinity, God's transcendence. God is beyond. And then you also have the name Elokim. The name Elokim is the same numerical value as Hateva, which means nature. That reflects how God contracts and conceals and hides his infinite energy in order to create a finite world, and how he runs the finite world. So there's a way that the world is, God is infinite and way beyond transcendent, and the way that God is invested in each detail. That's the Shem Elokim. And normally we think of those as like two very different realities, the way God is infinite and beyond and transcendent versus the way that God contracts and conceals and hides his light and is invested in each small event in creation. But the idea is that really they're one. Havaya is Elohim. It's all really the same God, and especially from God's perspective, obviously those different modes are all one. And one parable or example that's used in this discourse by the Rebbe Rashab is that the idea of the halacha about a yarmulke. There's the idea, of course, if you want to make a blessing, you should have your head covered. And so there's a halachic question, a very practical halachic question. Can you use your hand as a yarmulke? Can you cover your head with your hand and that be a head covering? And the rabbis conclude, no, you can't, because the idea of a covering means that it's something separate, something other, and therefore you can't cover yourself with yourself. The phrasing is ein davar mater atzmo. Something can't hide itself. You can't hide yourself with yourself. So that's the halacha, and that rule is actually used to kind of describe this idea that Havaya and Elokim are one. God as he is infinite is really the same as God as he is contracted and concealed. And because the same God that is infinite is the same God that's hiding his infinity. God is the Shem Havaya is infinite, and he's using his Shem Elokim, is what's called the Koach HaGvul, the power of finitude, the power of concealment, which comes from the Shem Elokim, to hide the Shem Havaya. And if it's the Shem Havaya Elokim that's hiding the Shem Havaya, they're really both one and the same source. So it's not really, from God's perspective, looking down, all he sees is divinity. It's all really one. Just like a person can't hide, cover his head with his hand as a yarmulke, because he's the same, he is made of himself. So that's like the kind of mystical background. And I had learned that discourse, it's a famous discourse. And then I was on the bus. I was on the bus in Jerusalem, and then I saw a man trying to use his hand as his yarmulke, which reminded me of that discourse I'd studied. And so then I just thought, this is I'll write a poem about this. And kind of it was a really interesting moment where you saw this profound, mystical, esoteric discourse coming to bear in on a bus in the ordinary. I think a lot of my
Yeah,
poems,
but also
yeah.
on the road to En Gedi,
Getty, right.
which I think just gives this flesh to that, because En Gedi is like also a
Water.
associated what?
Oh yeah, yeah. I agree. So the tzimtzum is the idea of this force, the Shem Elokim, hiding the infinite light, and you kind of a metaphor for that is like a waterfall, right? When you
Right.
have this
Also the
waterfall,
black
it's like the infinite
holes.
light. Yeah, you have a waterfall as the infinite light, and then a dam holds back the infinite light. It's kind of similar to the tzimtzum in a way, right? The contraction are holding back the light. Yeah, so it was a kind of interesting moment where the things that I was studying were kind of being represented in the nitty-gritty of daily life. But I think a lot of my work actually
It's beautiful.
kind of tries to combine those two ideas, this mystical and esoteric, with the most ordinary experience. Other questions?
Did your mother really give birth to co-joined twins?
Yeah, yes, it's a very sad chapter, yeah, but that's based on a true story, yeah. And to write that poem, I had to I actually kind of interviewed my mother to hear about it and learn about the details. My mother doesn't like, if she's in the audience, she doesn't like when I read that poem. It's too
I'm
triggering
sure
for
she
her.
doesn't. That's a very painful poem.
Yeah, it's a painful poem. Yeah,
And I can understand your father's reaction.
yeah, yeah.
Reaction.
Yeah, and the rabbi, in that poem, describing the poem, he was a young rabbi. He obviously said the worst possible thing you could say at that moment. Uh, you know, I would hope he wouldn't say that again as a more experienced rabbi. But that's an example of maybe how we live in an imperfect world and we're imperfect people, and we could hurt each other in relationships. Yeah.
Definitely. It was a beautiful poem.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions that anybody has? Do you want me to read
I
another? Oh,
saw
go ahead,
Barry.
Rabbi. Go ahead.
Barry
Barry.
had her.
Okay, Gary, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Not Gary, Barry.
Barry. Okay, I didn't see Barry here. Oh, I'm looking for Barry. Okay, yeah. Barry?
Barry, do you have a question?
Barry, you have to unmute, but it's possible that you were going to also ask about the
Okay,
conjoined
okay.
twins.
I'm unmuted now. Do you write in other forms other than poetry?
I write some prose, some essays. I don't really write fiction too much. But I do have some essays. I like to write about connections between contemporary poetry and Hasidic philosophy. I have some essays about that topic, but mainly poetry. I
Poetry
find,
is very
yeah, go ahead, sir.
difficult to write because it's so succinct.
Yeah, yes, I like poetry because life is very busy, and you could poetry, you don't have to spend so long in a poem necessarily. I mean, it could end up taking a long time, but I could just kind of, a lot of the poems I mentioned were kind of sections and they're just vignettes. So a lot of times I'll just be going through life and I'll observe some image that's striking to me, and I'll just put it in my phone memos. I'll just write that image down. And then I'll have like a whole page of just these different images, and then I'll go back to them and say, which of these images kind of fit together? And it's not really like cheating because, I'm living my life. It's a singular life, and I'm going through all these routines. And so to kind of collect these images, almost like a collage, does give the reader a picture of what a life looks like, I would say.
I really enjoyed listening to you read them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, I did too.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions or comments or insights? Peg?
Um, have you ever taught poetry? I mean, sorry, have you ever taught writers, potential writers of poetry?
Yeah, that's what I do for a living.
Okay, I'm sorry I didn't.
No, that's okay. So yeah, I teach creative writing at Rutgers University and in Touro University, and mainly what I teach is poetry, creative writing classes.
And are they with students who don't have a lot of experience writing poetry?
So there's different levels. One level I teach is like an intro class, and those students don't have much exposure, and they might not necessarily even have interest. They might just be taking the class to kind of fulfill a requirement. And those classes, I try as best as I can to expose students to poetry that's accessible, that they could understand. Because a lot of students come into a class with the conception that the less you could understand a piece, the more it qualifies as poetry. That poetry is like a riddle that you're supposed to be trained to unpack. Now, probably the reason for that is because most of the students have read work from earlier centuries. So the language, the diction is a little bit unfamiliar, and maybe those works were more given to analysis, and there's symbolism and so on and so forth. But a lot of contemporary poetry, at least certain schools of contemporary poetry, are very accessible. The work they produce is very accessible. I think my work is also along those lines. It's pretty narrative, almost like stories, and it's pretty easy to understand. So I want the students to realize that they could write poetry that makes sense and that people could understand. And then when they do that, they realize that it could be a vehicle to tell their stories. And everybody has a story to tell. Everybody really, I think, wants to tell the story, and it's healthy for everybody to tell their story and good, cathartic, and it helps people live more introspective lives and understand themselves and process their experiences. So that's what I try to do for the intro students, to try to expose them to poetry that they could understand and have them write about their lives, their family, their background, their interests. And then more advanced students, I might try to tailor the classes more to helping those students develop their singular voice, their particular poetic style, and I'll try to show them poems that seem to fit or might be good models for their particular style. So there is a difference. Those students are more serious and more interested, and then you might try to show them more advanced kind of techniques and in different schools of poetry.
What are two of your favorite poets?
I would say one of my favorite poets is named Adam Zagajewski. He's a famous Polish poet. He wrote his most famous poet was published after 9/11. It's called "Try to Praise the Mutilated World." It was a pretty famous poem that moment after 9/11. And he's interesting. He's a Polish poet. He passed away a couple of years ago. I find him to be fascinating because he was originally a philosophy student. So often his poetry explores philosophy and in contemporary life. He was born in 1945 in Lvov, Poland. So in the shadows of the Holocaust, he's not Jewish, but he's mystified by Jewish life and Judaism. He often writes about it, and he's really also a very a nice person. I had the good fortune to meet him a couple times and to keep up a little bit of a communication with him. So he's one of my favorite poets. I like Yehuda Amichai a lot, the Israeli poet who passed away around 2001, I think. And other poets I like, a lot of times what ends up happening is you study under various poets and they become your mentors and you admire their work. So there's certain poets. I went to college in Binghamton, SUNY Binghamton. There's a number of poets there: Liz Rosenberg, Maria Gillen, and I like the poet. She's an older contemporary American poet named Sharon Olds. You may have heard of her. She is very good because her poetry is really accessible. So I like to use that for my students. Yeah,
I
Gary,
like Billy Collins for that
you
reason.
like Billy Collins? Yeah, yeah. Gary?
The discussion about teaching reminded me that you read us a poem about
Teaching, right.
teachers and students, and I
Right.
wondered if that poem reflects your experience at Rutgers.
Yeah, yeah, partially, yeah. That some of it was drawn from that. Um, Teaching and yeah, and driving around, yeah, commuting.
You, I mean, is that a positive experience for you?
I do enjoy it. It's nice to, I mean, I feel like I'm really fortunate that I'm able to make a living teaching people to write poetry. It's almost hard to believe. So I'm definitely appreciative of it. The climate now in universities is somewhat troubling because of a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment. So that's kind of feels alienating a little bit at times. Right now, the faculty union at Rutgers wants to put forth a resolution to boycott they have a kind of like a joint program between Tel Aviv University and Rutgers, and they want to like try to get they want it to be boycotted. And so they want all the faculty to vote on it. It's coming from the faculty union. The truth is, it has no actual practical ramifications because in New Jersey, BDS is illegal. So it's just kind of like a symbolic vote. They just want the faculty to vote to kind of ostracize Israel, and so it's alienating as a Jewish professor to for them to like put up a vote just to and it's also not with the standing policy. Academic boycotts are like something that the union always fought against, and now since they want to apply one to Israel, they're like reversing their longstanding position in order to just to kind of to criticize Israel. So that kind of makes you feel a little alienated, but it's not everybody, that has those positions, but it's pretty pervasive in colleges. So that's a little upsetting and uncomfortable. But I basically try to go in, teach my classes. I haven't had any one-on-one, experiences where it was confrontational, but you definitely know it's in the air.
We have a few people who are working at Union College, who teach at Union College, who are
Hmm.
with us this evening. And
Hmm.
there's lots of schools up here, and I was a Hillel director. We know
Right,
what's going on. It's terrible,
right.
painful for us all. So
There's an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today about the boycotting of Israeli culture at universities.
Right.
That's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's just so hypocritical, really, because that was always such a strong policy of the union. They said, academic boycotts have no place. It's silencing intellectual inquiry. And the irony is probably a lot of the people in Tel Aviv University are actually against the war.
Sure.
So it's pretty foolish that they want to boycott them. Uh,
well, it's anti-Semitic.
Right, it's anti-Semitic. Yeah,
That's
and there's nobody's boycotting the Russian universities, and nobody's boycotting the Iranian universities. They don't care about it. The most egregious human rights violations. That's it's not on the radar. But they have to because of anti-Semitism, they feel they need to isolate Israel. Yeah, so. That's troubling. It's also really ubiquitous in the literary community. The literary community, there's even people who kind of make lists of writers who are like Google Doc lists of writers who are sympathetic to Israel, and kind of boycott them, refuse to publish them. So yeah, it's really scary. It kind of has the echoes of like pre-Holocaust kind of
yeah.
activities.
On the eve of Kristallnacht.
Yeah, yeah,
We have that in 2024.
yeah.
So
Yeah. But I guess one thing is, I think Jews are banding together. At least that's what, if there's something, a positive to it, I think Jews are coming together and realizing that we need each other and we have to transcend differences and to be unified and try to really work together.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We do. Well, if are there any final questions for Yehoshua before we close for the evening?
You want me to read one poem that references Kristallnacht
That would
or
be
the boycott? I'll read one more poem.
read one
Uh,
more poem and
yeah,
before you do
yeah,
that,
yeah.
everyone who attended tonight will get a copy of Yoshua's book. I don't know if I'll get there tomorrow, but I will definitely get there by probably Monday to leave these in the office at the shul. And you can stop by and I put a sticky with your name on it. So please type your name in the chat so I make sure that I have everyone's name so I can make sure you get your book. And
Okay.
Shmoo, I will mail you a book to Seattle.
So this last poem is called Hanukkah Kiel, Germany, and there was an anthology that was put out, and it was basically where the authors, a bunch of authors, were given Holocaust images and asked to write poems about it. So I was given this image. It's like a famous image. If you see where like you have the menorah on the windowsill, and then across from the windowsill you have a Nazi flag.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a famous image. So I was given that image and I was asked to write a poem about that image. Um, so the image actually comes from the apartment of the rabbi of Kiel. His name was Akiva Posner, and his wife was named Rachel. So, so you know them, Amy? Are they relatives of yours? No.
Yeah.
So that's Akiva and Rachel. So I also connect that in the poem. I don't mention them by name, but that's also, of course, the famous couple Rabbi Akiva and his wife Rachel,
Yes.
and they're the famous couple. And Rachel was a great righteous woman who you know. Favored and married Rabbi Akiva, even though when he was 40 years old, he couldn't read Hebrew yet, right? And she saw something special in him and she supported him and she encouraged him to learn. And then he ultimately, of course, became a martyr. He was killed by the Romans. So it's called Hanukkah, Kiel, Germany, after a photograph by Rachel Posner. So that was the picture that she took. On the sill of the Posner family apartment, what else but a menorah? And since this is late 1932, the window opens to a view of what else but a Nazi flag hanging from the town hall's gray stones on the opposite side of the street. Akiva, his wife Rachel, their three children, Gita, Shulamit, Avram Chaim, absent from the photograph Rachel has snapped. When darkness arrives, they will step into the frame to kindle the flames. The candle's symbolism almost too obvious, the juxtaposition to the swastika almost cliche. But this isn't literature, not speculation. That a Jew walks down streets, cooks dinner, reads the paper, sends letters, is remarkable, given she is a member of an eternal people. And here is the eight-branched mitzvah object on the eighth night. The precise physical proportions, the blessings, governed by finite rabbinic rules to draw the infinite God into this shoebox of a world, like soul into body. And note the couple's names. The husband's, that of the famous martyr, whose flesh Romans combed from his body. The wife's, that of the martyr's wife, who spent 24 years of her marriage alone so he could study the secrets stored in the crowns of letters, floating like ash from the scrolls Roman officers set aflame. This is 1932. In 4 months, on the night following the boycott, Akiva will risk his life to provide Jewish burial for the body of a young man who'd returned home for a visit, shot as he crossed the threshold of his parents' store. And the word for world, olam, is rooted in the word helem, which means the concealment of God. And the number 8 is one higher than nature, one beyond the world created in 7 days. But we still have not found out what 6 million means. Okay.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Yehoshua.
thanks so much for having me. We should all hear good news in Israel. Am Yisrael Chai.
Am
And
Yisrael Chai.
Ram
Thank
Yisrael Chai.
you.
Thank you. Amazing.
Thank
okay,
you.
take good
Wonderful.
care, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Be well.
Thank
And
you,
from
Amy.
the Adult Education Committee, thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you,
Thank
Amy.
you, Amy.